much, and I'm very sorry for this glitch. Without much ado, I just come down straight to the brass tacks here because I think the context has been said very beautifully by Mr. Mahapatra and Mr. Behra. And we simply cannot overemphasize the importance of inland waterway in addressing the logistic challenges in Odisha, and especially this particular belt, which perhaps in my limited experience of waterways, inland waterways, is the only track I see in the country where there is an optimal modal balance. You know, one of the logistical refrains of this country, if I may say, has been the fact that there's a lot of empty running in our country. Mr. Behra is from the railways, and you know, a coal movement on a box and rig, even a container rig movement is beset with this problem. But if we were to develop NW5, I can't think of a more symbiotic and more win-win kind of a project if we were to operationalize this. So with that, what I'll do is I'll just briefly introduce what exactly is Inland Waterways about, very briefly, so that we get a perspective of our capabilities also, which aren't too great actually. We're still a growing organization. That said, how we intend doing NW5, but I'll also, you know, keep on re-emphasizing one point, that this is a project where all the stakeholders would have to come in. So with that, I'll just start my presentation. So this is what it is. I mean, just to get the perspective about national waterways, we have to understand how many are there. 111 waterways. I mean, these are basically the rivers, the canal, the tributaries have been identified as national waterways, of which only 23, that's about 5,200 kilometers, have been identified for movement. And out of which very few actually, how many, I don't know, 16 or 17 actually are fit both for passenger and freight movement. That said, it should not deter us because the kind of potential it offers is enormous. And I'm very happy to share one bit of statistics, because in logistics, unless you back your assertion with numbers, they are meaningless, is that this is by far the fastest growing mode of transport in the country. And and really sky is the limit. There are issues, the capacity constraint, capacity not so much in terms of demand, but the capacity of IWI to deliver. I'll talk about that later. So this is what it is. If you see, the eastern part of our country is very well endowed with this resource, and this is the target area as far as if you look at the overall growth of the country is concerned, because west and south are going far a lot faster than east and certain parts of the north. And of course, when we talk more strategically in terms of our focus on Act East policy, the salience of waterways simply cannot be overlooked. So with this background, these are the numbers I was talking about. This bar chart is quite self-explanatory and need not dwell much on that. And if we are able to sustain this growth, even with the we haven't really invested too much with our limited investment, we sure are well on our way to achieve a target that has been set for the inland waterways by the Maritime Vision 2030 of carrying 200 million tons. So this is where we are at the moment. We are just about 2% of the total logistics share, which we want to enhance. Now, the good news is we are growing. The bad news I'll be sharing as I go along. But number one, of course, I mentioned was the capacity. Number two was the challenge of geography. I'll come to that later. So this, or to your right, is the brief history of inland waterways. So we are relatively new. And one point I'd like to state here that especially it would be of a lot of relevance to Mr. Mahapatra, who would have served at least more than 3 decades in government, that for any modal switch to happen, it requires a lot of sustained policy support and a lot of hand-holding. And waterways I've studied, I joined during the height of the second wave of Corona when not much was happening. So I read a lot of reports by the UNDP, by SCAP, by Asian Development Bank on the global experience of development of waterways. It takes generations to develop these. So when we look at Rhine or Danube or Scheldt or Mississippi or Yangtze or even Mekong, it has taken decades to come up with it. So although, yeah, future looks very bright and everybody's been talking about it, yet we have to, pause and have a very, very realistic assessment. That said, the potential still, as I've been maintaining, is enormous. And this is the commodity profile broadly. So For bulk cargo, which is not very time sensitive, where the logistics cost is perhaps the highest component of the overall costing, waterway is the mode, actually, the go-to mode. And when I talk about waterways as a mode, I don't look at waterways as a mode that is competing with rail or road here. We are actually, because I have worked in container corporation, I've worked in railways, and now I look at waterways here. We actually do a lot of complementary kind of, supplementary kind of road. To give you a small example, yesterday, yesterday only, my minister flagged off the consignment of steel from Calcutta to Guwahati, which will be transported via waterway. Now, steel is a commodity that is ideally suited for carriage by rail. But my problem is with rail is that if I were to carry small consignments, 400, 500 metric tons, this particular consignment was 900 metric tons, railways availability of rolling stock becomes an issue, number one. Number two, cost is higher. And most importantly, the opportunity cost is even higher, because most of our railways, most of the railway routes in the eastern sector are as it is saturated. It makes far more sense for the economy, for any sensible, public policy practitioner to move 3,200 tons of coal for power plants rather than using that rolling stock and the path, which is a very critical component in logistics, for moving just 900 tons of steel when it can move by waterways. So clearing that air, now I come specifically to waterways in the context of the state of Odisha. Now let me start with a confession. I have unfortunately never visited Odisha. Most of my knowledge has come by interacting with professionals who have worked. I'm glad Architecno is participating in this. I've had an informal interaction with them. They've done a good yeoman service here in this area. And I've spoken to people from WAPCOS and certainly our professionals from Inland Waterways who've been a part of National Waterway 5 projectization. So what little I have understood, I'll just share with you. So the advantage are, I've just listed here, these four. Economical, yes, Mr. Behra and Mr. Mahapatra pointed out, it is a very economical mode of transport, cost per ton basis. It is very eco-friendly mode of transport, needless to say it is in terms of its carbon footprint. And although in our short-termism, whenever we talk of our silos, respective silos, be it railways, roadways, waterways, we have a very short-term view. But if you see the long-term view, we have to move towards sustainable growth. We have to meet the targets set for India, for the country, and as part of COP26. So we have to look at this issue strategically. But the point I'm trying to highlight is my bullet point number 3. Everywhere else, whether we are adding capacity to railways or we are adding capacity to roadways, there is a strong element of land acquisition, which is a very vexatious, it's a tricky, it's a contentious issue. And as the years go by, with the population on land, the fragmentation of holding and blah, 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 all these things happening is going to become ever more intractable. Waterways, the biggest advantage waterways offers in Odisha is that when you use waterways, you are adding to your logistics capacity, you are adding to your transport capacity without having to acquire land. Acquisition of land, there are a lot of IAS officers in the audience here, people who have dealt with land-related issues. It's a tricky issue, not only an economic issue, it has social dimension, it has cultural dimensions. Okay, so and of course, economic dimension. So waterway does not require land acquisition, which it confers it a big advantage. And the third and the last point that I really want to highlight, especially for the benefit of my friends from the industry and the state government, that there would be a great degree of hand-holding, lot of support by the government. By government here, I mean the central government. This central government is very much committed to developing waterways. We are not looking at short-term gain. And every time I'm speaking in a seminar or in any audience or any forum, one thing I keep emphasizing ad nauseum is that this is Inland Waterways Authority of India and not Inland Water Transport Corporation of India. I am not really looking at the bottom line, the financial bottom lines here. I'm just trying to develop a mode of transport. So a lot of hand holding. So these are the advantages that all the stakeholders here, our friends from the industry as well as the state government of Odisha, I hope they are, sensitized to this aspect, the advantages that waterways confers. However, let me red flag certain issues. The first and foremost are the initial investment, because developing waterway, Mr. Behra pointed out in his address, is it's a costly exercise, because you have to look at dredging, you have to look at the kind of interferences that comes in, like in terms of bridges, like, the pontoons, etc., etc. Good news is that all these interventions and all these interruptions, can be handled. They can be tackled. We have the technology, we have the wherewithal. The bad news, however, is that they all require very, very heavy investment. So initial investment in waterways is high. But that said, and that was one. The second is geography. Now, the fact is that our rivers are, if I were to state a difference between rivers in India and rivers in other countries where inland water transport is developed, is that our rivers are not deep. They are wide and they are shallow and they are seasonal. So I'm forever fighting geography. And trust me, this whole 5,000 crore rupees project on National Waterway on Ganga, our engineers only know the kind of problems that we face in terms of the silt load that comes year after year, the shifting banks, the meandering river, changing of course of rivers, and the debris that comes in, that makes not only navigability suspect, but it can also become a safety hazard. So geography is a very critical dimension. Of course, this problem is not so acute, thankfully, in Odisha, but this is something we will do very well to be very, very cognizant of and aware of. The third and a very critical dimension as far as waterways in Odisha is concerned are the conflicting claims. Inland waterways, unfortunately, have a right on the waterway. We don't have right over water. Water is very much a state subject, and there are conflicting claims to the water. You need water for drinking. Unfortunately, we've been using rivers not so much for navigation. We've been using rivers as a natural reservoir of water for irrigation, for drinking. So there are conflicting claims, and I really won't blame the state government if it say that, okay, the first right to the river water would be for drinking purposes, then for irrigation only waterway would come a distant third. But that is fine. But this is, again, we have to be very, very, very aware of. And fourth is the whole ecosystem. If I were to develop inland water transport as a mode of transport, the whole ecosystem has to be developed, which means I have to develop the fairways, I have to develop navigation facilities, I have to develop terminals, and most importantly, I have to get the entire ecosystem of transport. That means the vessels, the barges, the tugs, the dredgers, their maintenance facility, everything in place. And then with that, bringing that in, then I have to make a big transition from one mode to the other by getting all the major consigners by this whole concept of waterway. That mental block has to be overcome. We are switching from trailers, from dumpers to from railway wagons to waterway. This whole transition would require a change in the mental mind, the mind space also of the consigners. So these are the few, the challenges. I wouldn't say impediment, they are certainly the challenges. The bad news is these challenges are there. They are pretty stark. They are of very large magnitude. But the good news is with technology, with the kind of right policy interventions, all these challenges are very much surmountable. Now, I'll just come to now specifically to our thoughts on National Waterway 5. Now we have, for the convenience of execution and for the convenience of projectization, this is what we really have in mind. We divided this whole thing into 3 stretches. Mangalgadi to Pankapal. Basically, this whole stretch. The good news about this stretch is that this is predominantly tidal stretch, if I'm not mistaken, which gives us LAD here. If you see the table to your right, it talks about LAD. LAD is least available depth. So this gives us a depth, a perennial depth of 1.2 meter, which can definitely be enhanced. Yeah.
Tidal will be 1 meter.
Yeah, and yeah, of course, that's a good thing. Our Mr. Murugesan is the engineer, the deputy director here, who's in charge of this. Now he is telling me because of the tidal flow, this minimum depth is naturally augmented by 1 meter. So this stretch is very, very convenient for initial part of it. So we just have to do extensive hydrographic bathymetric surveys, identify the channels, mark the channel, remove obstacles, and get the waterway operational. Second part is the tricky one, the Talcher to Pankapal. This is a tricky part because here there are availability of water would be an issue, and I'll come to that. I have details slide if time permits. I'll be very happy to share those. Here, depth is a problem because as you move more and more inland, the available depth goes on increase. So here, a lot of intervention would be required, which I'll be mentioning outlining briefly in my subsequent slide. And of course, the third slide is the third phase. Is the stretch from Dhamra to Charbatia and Charbatia to Jayant Singh. So in all, this is not a very ambitious project. If you are able to, divide it rationally, phase 1, phase 2 can be taken up, which would be about 120 plus about 200, 320 odd kilometers, which is eminently doable. I say eminently doable because the stakes are very high. We have traffic both upstream and downstream. And then it is an iterative process. Like Ganga, we've been working on Ganga for the last about 3.5 years. There are a lot of things we learn as we go along the way. We have to be very, very flexible in our approach. For example, something as elementary, as basic, as dredging a waterway, there are 3 or 4 different models, there is no one size fit all solution. So we have to improvise as we go along. And this is the kind of traffic potential that we have. This is based on WAPCO's study, right? So WAPCO had undertaken a traffic survey also, and I won't say this is the last word. I'm glad Mr. Punia highlighted the fact that they are commissioning very, very detailed studies. So I would love to I'll be very happy to share my report. At the same time, I'd love to exchange notes with him that what are their findings. Of course, we'll be talking to each of the consigners and ICC separately on this. Architecno has done a great study. So I hope they would also agree, plus or minus 10% that this is the kind of, these are the kind of volumes that we are looking at. Gypsum and a whole lot of other movements that are there. I mean, to start with, and of course, a lot of movement of sand, stone aggregates, which is a very important component of the building industry. This is very, very important. And of course, and when we talk of waterway, we don't talk of longitudinal movement alone. We should also look at the cross river movement, through roll on, roll off, or cargo movement there. Here, of course, if is Mr. Punia still with us, or do we have Manoj Mishra with us here in the audience?
Mr. Punia, no, unfortunately, Mr. Manoj Mishra and Mr. Punia are away in the meeting with the.
Mr. Pani, this is the biggest problem with. I see issue with government. Even I'll be also taking off. I had a meeting at 12:30. Government bureaucrats like talking and they don't like listening. So I'm sorry. I also belong to that.
But the team of EPCOL is there, sir. The officials from
entire team is there. And of
course, Mrs. Anu Garg has been bereaved recently. She lost her father, unfortunately, who was my boss a long time ago. So I can understand she's not there. But anyway, so these are some of the the kind of traffic that we have. If you see, there are a lot of issues of coordination with the state government that we have to handle regarding movement of gypsum, regarding movement of stone aggregate, and the roll-on, roll-off operation. And this brings me back to the point that anything that we decide on waterway cannot be done by Inland Waterways Authority alone. There has to be a support from the state government. A lot of support. Support does not even only mean financial support. Is not. I'm not even looking at. I don't want financial support. I just want, because ultimately they are the custodians. They are the owners of this. Whatever asset is created is for the betterment of the people, betterment of the state. So with that spirit, we'll have to work. And industrial cargo, the potential is this. Again, I'm not so sure about the numbers here. I am numerically challenged here. So this is a number that we have as far as the potential is concerned. Kalinganagar industry, if you look at long-term prospect, and we are in 2022 already. So by the time we are able to execute this project in 3 to 4 years, it will take. These are the numbers we're looking at. 19 million tons per annum is still, I would say, a very, very conservative estimate. So the potential is enormous. Okay. And this is when I'm just talking about movement from the hinterland up to the ports. If I were to add coastal movement, and this is what actually our long-term vision is. Again, I will not look at from the point of view of Inland Waterways Authority alone. I will look at it from a more macro level perspective. This segment going via coastal shipping up to Haldia, up to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a booming economy. They would need a lot of imports from Odisha. I mean, the sky is the limit. And if you are able to create some sort of an economic zone here, something like a NAFTA or something, then of course, even the actual figures would transcend my optimism by a factor of 4 or 5. And that said, I just like to state the way ahead, how we see it should develop. And this is what I would like ICC and other stakeholders to be mindful of. First of all, we need a very, very solid institutional architecture. So by means of that, I mean either an agreement or we have an MOU which needs to be with the Odisha government, which needs to be revived, not only revived, but we'll have to make it more comprehensive, following it up with a few very, very solid agreements, especially regarding movement of gypsum, regarding movement of stone aggregate. And not only that, integration of stakeholders. Good thing about National Waterway 5 is that there are a lot of big consigners, big consignees. So when I talk of investment, I'm not looking at constructing jetties, because I think Jindals and all the big players here, Tatas and all, they would have their own jetties. The second, we would like a more in-depth and a robust detailed project report. Architecno has done a good job. I'm glad that state government is also commissioning a study. So we need to delve into all this, and I just hope these studies are not copy-paste jobs. They are based on some actual survey, actual potential, but conducted with a lot of with collection and analysis of a lot of primary data, not a mere intermodal extrapolation of data, which unfortunately happens when we conduct traffic surveys. Third thing then we have to do, once we have all this data, we have to do projectization. 3 projects. Number 1, fairways. How are we going to develop the waterways? Number 1, the fairways for movement. Number 2, what kind of structures we need to build, what kind of jetties or terminals we need to build, and what kind of structures we need to remove. There'll be a lot of bridges, they will have to be removed, their level will have to be raised, a lot of coordination would be required with railways also, and I'm glad East Coast Railway is now based out of Bhubaneswar, so it would hopefully make things a lot easier. And ... vessels, because this is, to my mind, a major challenge for Inland Waterways. I have a very small fleet, because my commercial operation is not my mandate. So I have a very, very limited fleet of vessels. How to get more vessels here is going to be a challenge, but we have to convert that into some sort of a project that either we do acquisition of vessels, or we come up with some program whereby we are able to finance manufacturing of vessels by shipyards, acquisition of vessels, and leasing of vessels by the operators or the consignees, as the case may be. Then once we have the project, we have to make sure that we get the right funding. And the kind of funding I shared earlier in one of my slides would require us to the tune of something like 5,000 crores. It's a big project, but still 5,000 crores, I think it would be in national interest that we spend this money. The returns will, and if you see the economic returns, the environmental benefit that will come up with Waterway, the kind of ancillary spin-offs that would accrue to the state would more than compensate. And I'm sure our consultants sitting in ADB and World Bank can do the number crunching and make it a very, 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 very viable project. So I leave that to leave the funding part to the experts here. And then the project will have to be managed very professionally. And last but not the least would be the upscaling. By upscaling, I mean better coastal linkages, with coastal shipping, so that we are able to bring Odisha hinterland in viable contact with Bangladesh, with other states of India through coastal shipping and waterway combination. And when I convert all this from the idea to actual, doable things, that the real nuts and bolts, this is what it basically entails: signing MOU, which I mentioned, vetting of designs and drawings and the DPRs, and the DPRs for modification of bridge structures. So everywhere, if you see the slide very carefully, it is a two-way. It's a two-way street. It would require a lot of full-time commitment by Odisha government. So we need to create, that's why when I mentioned the roadmap, I mentioned a very strong institutional architecture. We need that, otherwise this just won't take off. And then detailed project report. Once we have all these in place, only then we can actually start with the actual construction on the ground. And the construction, this is again pure civil engineering slide, would require this: 4 weirs, 3 navigation locks, 2 check dam, 1 rubber dam, 9 road bridge modifications, shifting of high tension line, construction of multimodal terminal at Pankapal. I'm sure for this there'll be this can be done via PPP, because this project is so lucrative that I'm very, very positive, unless we have some major macroeconomic meltdown, if we continue on the trajectory of growth, the Indian economy, I'm sure I'll be able to find partners under the design, build, operate mode here. And this is the index map. Again, this details are just to get a spatial appreciation of this whole waterway. So I'll just let the slide remain for 30 seconds for the consumption of our audience. And I would request here the stakeholders, I mean, I haven't been to Odisha. The best way to do it would be to arrange some sort of a chopper, some helicopter, so that we can actually traverse along this and come back within a couple of hours. That will be the best way to understand, or some sort of a drone photography. So whoever is undertaking a DPR would be well advised to use a lot of drones and satellite imagery, along with some sort of an aerial reconnaissance, to get a good appreciation of this entire stretch. These are the bridges, there are a whole lot of them. I'm not talking much here because unless I see them physically, I will not be able to talk with authority. But it is quite challenging. But again, it's an engineering challenge, so no issue with that. I mean, we have the technology global, and of course, when we will undertake a project here, it would be we'll go for the best in the world in terms of technology. And the shifting of cable. So these are 3-4 critical components here: high tension line, shifting, and all. So with this, I will end my presentation.